Hi everyone, this is Dr. Jane with Avalon Rises, and I am here with another installment of our astrology analysis, A Planet Among the Stars. And today I'm going to be talking about another planetary retrograde for 2022, the Jupiter retrograde. So just to keep track, right now, we have got a lot of planets testing us on our lessons. We have got Pluto retrograde, Saturn retrograde, Neptune retrograde, and Jupiter is joining forces. And I want to point out that these are all, at this point, of the collective action planetary forces. So when I say that the planets are pushing us collectively to build a new world, I really mean it. So this time, we've talked about Saturn, and we're actually going to do a midway check-in on the Saturn retrograde because some shifts have happened there in another video next week. But we've talked about Saturn retrograde, we've talked about the Neptune retrograde. So what is Jupiter doing joining the fray? Okay, so Jupiter retrograde is running from July 28th until November 23rd. And Jupiter retrograde is doing something pretty interesting because it is starting in the sign of Aries. And then on October 28th, it is actually going to transition back into the sign of Pisces. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what both of those energetic shifts mean for us. But first, let's just talk a little bit about Jupiter so that you can kind of understand the energies that Jupiter is really wanting to work with in our lives. And again, to urge us to look at these things on an individual level because, if we are all working and shifting individually, then the collective will change. Right. And, I remember when I was a little girl, my mom used to say that it took every drop in the bucket to make the bucket full. Right. And this is collective action. And so Jupiter, I like to say that Jupiter is the jolly giant of the zodiac. He is large and in charge. They also, sometimes astrologers refer to Jupiter as the beneficent ruler, or the Great Beneficent, because Jupiter is really associated with growth, expansion, prosperity, abundance, good fortune, and good luck, charity and service. Okay, right? And in that way, also wisdom and spirituality, and not quite in the same vein as Neptune, but from a perspective of a wise and beneficent king, right? And this actually all really makes sense when you look at Jupiter from the Kabbalistic perspective, from the universal Kabbalah, where Jupiter is the ruling planet of the Sephirah Hesed. And Hesed is all about that wise king energy, very generous, but also in service. Right? And also this is the sphere of abundance in Kabbalah. And so, and this is because it's interesting, a lot of the time, we have this relationship backwards. We think that if we look at royalty, or if we look at service, and we look at abundance, and we look at the relationships among them, we think that you have the abundance and then you are royal, or you have the abundance and then you serve. Except it's the other way around. That in fact, the abundance comes from the worthiness. It comes from the royalty. It comes from the service. And so this is something that the energy of Jupiter really, really calls us to. And in Jupiter retrograde, what we are going to really see is Jupiter wants us to know what brings us joy. Jupiter is all about joy. Sometimes I joke that Jupiter is the party boy of the zodiac, of the planets, because, Jupiter really wants us to be joyful in our lives, because that's also when we are in joy, then, and we are expressing our joy, then we are abundant, then we do have good fortune, then all of the other qualities of Jupiter flow from that place. And so, one of the aspects to building a new world is being in joy. Joy is a fundamental pillar of the new paradigm, and expressing ourselves in joy. And so this retrograde is really going to highlight for us, what is it that we love, that brings us joy? And sometimes it's going to show us this by showing us what we don't love, what does not bring us joy. And so it's not like it's going to be not kind of crunchy. Like, there might be times when you are like, ugh, I just don't have joy in this. And when you have that moment, know, oh, that's actually Jupiter retrograde showing me where I'm putting my energy into things that aren't joyful. We don't want to be doing that, because if we are putting ourselves in that energy of, forcing ourselves, not being in joy, we won't be living our purpose. That's actually showing us where we are misaligned with our mission and what we came here to do. And it's also going to block abundance. It's going to block the flow of prosperity and good fortune. So Jupiter's like, yo, don't do that. Don't just set yourself up for failure like that. Go over here instead, because you don't find joy here. So check something else out instead, right? And this is particularly relevant to the energy of Aries, where Jupiter is starting its retrograde. Because you might remember from a previous video where I talked a little bit about Aries, in the Aries new moon, where I spoke about Aries as the archetype of the sacred warrior. Okay, right? And Aries, as an archetype, knows it has a sacred mission, and that it is here to accomplish that sacred purpose of the sacred warrior. And so your calling, your true mission, your true individuality is going to be really called forth by Jupiter. And you're going to be pushed to expand in those areas, to grow in those areas, and to expand your progression in your sacred mission. So how uncomfortable this retrograde is for you is going to be entirely dependent on how aligned you already are with that mission. Because if you are not, and you are resisting even maybe accepting that you have one, you're going to have some moments with Jupiter where it's going to be really calling you to that. But when you make the shifts, then the fruits are going to be right there and so abundant, because Jupiter is really going to be enhancing that in your life. And then, Aries is really asking, how well are you serving yourself on your path with your mission? And as I mentioned, the prosperity comes from that alignment with your true self. And so it's great because Jupiter's starting in Aries, and it's a very individually focused sign, right? And then it's moving into Pisces, which is a very collectively oriented sign. And this transition is going to move the focus of that energy to that collective journey. Spiritual growth as a collective, so in ourselves and others, and service to others and to this new world that we want to build. And so, how mind-blowing is that when I'm sitting here and I'm talking about how the whole theme of this year is shifting ourselves as individuals so that we can shift ourselves as a collective, and then in comes Jupiter starting its retrograde with the lessons for the individual and your sacred path and aligning you with that, and then moving into the sign where we are now going to be working very collectively to build that better world that we're all dreaming of in that energy of Pisces. just so cool, right? This is my favorite thing about it, how it all fits together. As a scientist, like, I don't have to sit here and make it up. The data are right there. It's amazing. And the patterns are right there, and it's just so beautiful, right? So, this in general too, this retrograde, like as I was talking about the big theme of the year, right? Well, this retrograde will also augment and call back the lessons of the other retrogrades, which are all very similar. It's themes and variations here this year, guys, right? It's all different facets. Saturn calling us to express our individuality by looking at our boundaries and our relationships with governing structures and other forces in our life that are perhaps impeding our expression of our individuality, and assessing those limits and those boundaries that we're setting with ourselves. And then Neptune calling us to really look at our spiritual connection and our spirituality and our intuition, and are we listening to our higher selves and to our hearts, and progressing internally and spiritually. And now Jupiter really combining those and saying, hey, are you in your joy? Are you living your sacred mission? Are you aligned with what you came here to do? And when you are, you will be in joy and you will be in prosperity. And so all of these are all working together right now to bring us into this new place together. So I just love that so much, and it's just so beautiful, and I just love getting to be able to share it with all of you, and of course, as I mentioned at the end of every video, as always, we are here to help. Like I said, this is not necessarily a situation that's going to be super comfortable, because if you look around at the world today, a lot of us aren't necessarily perfectly aligned with our mission. I know I'm also still not, even as I'm incrementally aligning my life more and more with what I came here to do. There are going to be parts that I haven't figured out yet, and that's okay, because I'm going to use these tools, and I also can share these tools with you. So we would love to talk to you more about this and hear how this is playing out for you as an individual, because we're all these unique, wonderful individuals, and seeing how these energies are manifesting in your life is so cool. So absolutely send us an email, join our email list, book a consult, whatever it is, make a comment, subscribe. We love to hear from you. Thanks.